Everybody got their mics on?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right, so let's start. This special board meeting of the Board of Trustees of Judson ISD will be held today. And the subjects that we are discussing is the evaluating and improving student outcomes. We've got Patricia with us, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, Patricia.
All right. Good evening.
Good
Good to see
evening,
you all
afternoon.
again. The first part of our evening or our afternoon today is going to be on the ISO training. As Renee mentioned, the evaluating and improving student outcomes. It's a big one, so so I apologize in advance for the density of this presentation. It's newly revamped, and I'll be referring to my notes quite a bit since it just came out, which we'll get into. A lot of it is stuff we've talked about, and a lot of it is really important to grounding the work that we move forward in governance and the framework. So we'll get through it, and we'll stop for questions, and if you have input or anything, you just do this kind of casually get through it. Does that sound okay?
Sure.
So before we get started, let's just do a one-word check-in. I haven't seen you guys in a little while, and also, there's a... But, so, I am super excited to be here. I apologize for canceling on the last one, but thank you for checking in on my mom, and she's doing a lot better. My sister's up there with her now. So, I'm happy to be here. And so that's my word, happy.
Okay.
Anybody can go
Shall we
next.
adjust this now? Forget to have a word ready.
I know, me too.
I'm excited.
Excited.
Yes.
I would say I'm happy also.
It's a good word. It's a good word to be happy.
It's a good word, especially around this time. In the school year.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the word. I'm happy too. I don't know what else to say. I came in on a great high, a good attitude. I've had a great day, so I'm happy.
Excellent.
It's not one word. Can I do more than one word?
know.
I am looking forward to all the events that are coming up and things that are happening that we're kind of sort of getting back to normal, and we'll be able to.
Yeah, springtime's always fun in the school district.
I'm ready.
Dr. Ball?
Excellent. Okay, so let's get started on this. So as you know, this is a requirement of boards, and it's just basically about the oversight of academic achievement. This kind of leans into the governance framework that we've been talking about. You know, how are the boards of trustees are actually required to oversee academic progress in their school districts, and so this kind of gives you some of the behind-the-scenes work that's happening with your districts and requirements of the TEA. And you know, I like to look at this and say there's a lot of vertical alignment being built through these processes that align with your goal process that you guys have been leaning into over the last few months. So we've got some objectives of this that we're going to discuss the school board behaviors correlated with improved student outcomes, which we've already talked a lot about. Monitoring progress, setting goals, creating a vision and values for your community through your school district. We're going to review the state accountability and the TEKS and that kind of structure, and then explore progress monitoring practices, and especially with an emphasis, and this is kind of a new part of the ISO, students with disabilities and emerging bilingual students, and we'll talk a little bit about that new language as well. So any questions about the objectives? No? Okay. All right, so you guys have seen this. Student outcomes do not change until adult behaviors change, and which adults need to change?
All of us.
All of us, that's right. It is all of our responsibilities. And there are three key drivers to that change. The knowledge. Now, do we have the, is that me making that sound? Okay.
Mine's on.
Okay. knowledge, do we have the knowledge of what those practices look like? Do they have the skills? Are we making sure we're embedding those skills, and then the mindset change, right? And so that's true for teachers, that's true for our leaders, that's true for our students, right? We need to know that Johnny has the skills to do fractions, that he has the knowledge of why he needs to know how to do fractions, and then he has the mindset that he can do fractions. And that goes all the way up to leadership change. And so you can see that mindset is such a big key to that. Those high expectations, those expectations that our students can achieve are so critical. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I've showed you this slide probably 10 times, and this is just the structure of what we built here, and we pretty much got almost all of that. We're just getting to the bottom part of it and a little bit on the values work, and this is a proven model, and so we're excited to continue to lead into that structure. So we're going to review a little bit, mostly on the 60-30. How many of you guys know what the 60 by 30 goal is, and when it came about, and why? Trustee Diaz? Did you raise your hand?
I do. Yeah. You want to talk about it?
Sure.
So I think it was the plan to ensure that, is it 60% of students are CCRS ready by 2030?
Right?
Including adult education, and then ensuring that, I think everything was aligned to the state goals. Is that
18 by 26, 18 to 26, right? And or 25 to 34, actually, if we look at it on the broad spectrum of the kids or students that are ready and that they have completed college. So we know if students complete college, that they will have double wage earnings as kids who only graduate from high school. So this was an initiative that both supported our students and also supported the workforce development. How are we building up our workforce? And I think it's, really what it is if Texas students win, then all Texans win, right? And so that's what it was designed for.
And that was designed by the tri-agency, right? TEA, Workforce, and Higher Ed Coordinating Board?
I'm sorry?
The plan was built by TEA, Higher Education Coordinating Board, and Workforce.
Right, and so the data crosses all of those, which is the first time, and it was really designed to make Texas one of the best states in the union. And it's, it's working, so at least 550,000 students by 2030 will complete a certificate, an associate's, a bachelor's degree, so it runs the spans. And you see a lot of the innovations in school districts leaning into this, early college high schools, a broader base of certificate programs, all of the things, and also a better handoff from our K through 12 to our higher ed. And so there's a lot of things in here, and part of this is also the HB3 goals, which are tied into that around college and career readiness. One of the key. Any questions on that? No? Speaking of the HB3, board adopted goals, which you guys have in your goals. The first two are in the early literacy and early mathematics, and those are STAAR goals, right? Those are proficiency goals. And then the college and career readiness, which is, really about assessing what are those indicators are for college and career readiness and military readiness, and how we measure that. And we talked about that a lot with you guys, so I'm not going to go too deep in it today because those were the conversations that we had when we discussed these goals in your goal progress measures as well, and how we got there, and you really dug into the root causes and why these are so critical. And these exactly are designed to play into that 60 by 30 initiative. Questions? All right, I'm going to keep going through then. Second initiative, so that was our first initiative, was the 60 by 30, and the second big statewide initiative came relatively, well, it's fairly lately, right? And it's really about teaching the science of reading, right? So you hear about the academies, the reading academies, and it's really about including research-based, high-quality core reading instruction, so that we have a kind of a commonality on how our teachers are teaching literacy, early literacy. And in many cases, I don't know how many of your teachers have already gone through the academy?
Several hundred. Yeah, we have the new group that started this year, so we have, I would say the good that have completed probably already 300 to 400, and then another one will complete this year too.
It's a really rigorous process, and I think it's been a lot. But hopefully it will be helpful as they move through, and as teachers come back into the classroom and bring those tools. I think it'll be a much more measurable.
We're having a big air show
right next door.
at Randolph this
Okay.
weekend, and all the aircraft are coming in. So
Okay.
we're gonna hear some really big
Yeah.
ones, and,
But it's not until this weekend. Yeah.
but the bigger
But
planes
they're
are coming in
practicing.
today.
They're
Yeah.
practicing.
Well, they're arriving.
They're
and-
arriving, yeah.
so.
Okay, so this is just about that third grade literacy as I spoke, and I think we have, and I'm not positive that it's going to work on this. I didn't think about that. I do have a video that I wanted to show you guys.
Do you think maybe he could help you? No, we can-
Tell us what the video is.
Yeah, I can get the links. I have the links. They're in the,
So it's not on the PowerPoint?
well, I have to give you guys the PDF because of
Oh,
data,
Okay.
the data problem, the challenge, the leaks. And so you can't click on it in, but I can give the links.
The
Maybe.
URL.
Okay.
okay. So you want to send him the links, or you want to send it to me, and then I can open up my email that right there on that computer?
That'd be perfect.
Okay.
Okay.
Patricia, you were surrounded by computer geeks. There's
All of them?
Yes, yes, they're all geeks, not me. I'll just say
I don't know how to geek, but.
you were surrounded by,
I would say I'm
Surrounded.
computer literate. I don't know that.
There you
it's
go.
a geek.
okay, all right, she's literate
But-
enough that she could help you.
But yes.
And I could only point you in the direction of somebody that could help you.
There you go.
Or maybe I am a geek. I don't know. I built my own
You're a
website.
whole lot better
I built my
than
own website years ago with
I'm
HTML.
not doing it.
Yeah, that's pretty geekish.
Back before they had like front page and any of those
Yeah.
other, you know,
Yeah.
or you could just, yeah.
I forgot the password here. I got a new computer too, and so now I got to get online. I'll just show it. Can I do that? Because I can't get. online.
How was your day today, you two? Jeannie? Good?
Good. I went to school
Busy.
today.
Busy.
How's
It's been
that?
a while since I.
Oh,
Yeah.
you were at the campus?
Not in Judson, but I was
Yeah,
at
not- yeah.
some campuses today, so, yeah.
At the first round of visits since, or I guess in
I've
a
been
while?
to a few, because at the beginning of the school year, we had a coach who was out, so I was doing some on a pretty regular basis, but like, I get out of the habit because it's not my day-to-day.
Mhm.
So it's probably the first time since like November or something.
Yeah.
Feels strange, huh?
Mhm.
Maybe it will. No. 9-1-CJ. Go ahead. We're going to watch this video and it'll.
The
Okay.
Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, TEKS, are the curriculum standards that guide classroom instruction across the state. All of the English language arts and reading and Spanish language arts and reading, TEKS, are grouped into 7 categories called strands. These strands are guided by literacy research and embody the interconnected nature of listening, speaking, reading, writing, and thinking. The TEKS in each of their corresponding strands tell Texas teachers what knowledge and skills need to be taught explicitly, systematically, and simultaneously in order to make a skilled reader and writer. The first strand is developing and sustaining foundational language skills. TEKS in Strand 1 are focused on developing both the decoding and encoding skills, as well as the oral language comprehension needed to be a fluent reader and writer. These TEKS fall into the following substrands: beginning reading and writing, oral language, vocabulary, fluency, and self-sustained reading. The second strand is comprehension skills. As students develop their foundational skill to become fluent readers and writers, a teacher simultaneously is developing their ability to comprehend both oral and written language using the TEKS in the comprehension strand. Strands 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 guide Texas teachers in how to engage students in using both oral and written language in complex ways. The third strand is focused on responding to text. The fourth strand guides students through multiple genres of text. The fifth strand develops thinking around the author's purpose and craft within a text, while strand 6 provides the structures for composition in different genres. Finally, the seventh strand is focused on using text to guide inquiry and research. When used together, all of the TEKS strands help teachers develop skilled readers and writers that are able to think critically and adapt to the ever-evolving nature of language and literacy.
Okay, so what stood out for you in that video?
The strands.
The strands.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, gotta find more of mine.
Did I close it out too much, maybe?
No.
Look down at the bottom. I think I see an Adobe
all of those things down there.
icon in the toolbar. There you go.
Okay, so we kind of look at the strands. The second issue is support those teachers with the science of teaching, and those all tie to the streaks, the TEKS. So the way that we're tying also all of this together is through the EDF, which is a theory of action that is new, and this is a kind of a new initiative that is in pilot form right now. That'll support the alignment. We've talked a lot about the alignment in here, vertical alignment from the board table all the way to the campuses. So this was really designed for campus rollout to help create vertical alignment on a campus and the supports. And there was a ton of feedback that was given to the TEA on that. And so there was a pilot done, and then they decided that they were going to go ahead and roll this out and try it district-wide. So really looking at this from a district perspective and kind of tying together the rollout just on how we want to create a process of building that vertical alignment, both with, so the purpose of it really is kind of been outlined in here. So we have continuous improvement efforts, right? The alignment and norming across the state. And this was really important because it allowed nonprofits, it allowed school districts, it allows ESCs all to kind of have this commonality so that if they want to support, they can direct their support at the exact same moment and the exact same place where districts need the most support. So it created kind of a common process that allowed all of not just to create the vertical alignment at the campus level or even at the district level, but now it's starting to roll out at the state level. And so that's really exciting. This will come out pretty much, it started coming out in this last year, and it's piloted In 22-23 will be a pilot, a full-out pilot, and then roll out completely Texas-wide in the 22-20 or the 23-24 school year.
Okay.
And so that's really exciting to see what that looks like. And these are the components of that rollout and that overview. And so when we talk about the organizational performance management, that's really where the goals are set, right? That's establishing kind of this where we want to be and where we want to go. That's where the board comes into play. And then these elements scroll up to support that, that organizational performance management system and that lever. And so the second lever, which is really about the human capital, that's about retention, that's about hiring, that's about training, recruitment, all of those things that show up a lot of times in our value systems. How are we making sure that we're supporting our teachers and putting our teachers in the right place to create the conditions for success, right? The conditions for improvement and performance. And then the support for student readiness to learn is really about, targeted interventions. What are those? How do they look like? How can we roll them out? What's the best way to do it? And then lever 4, which is really saying, does every student have access to high quality instructional materials? Is every teacher putting those in each classroom? Is every student getting the opportunity to learn? So that lever to me is more of an equity lever. Like, how are we making sure that we are spreading these across all of our campuses and all of our students so that they have the opportunity and the access to all the high quality instruction that we see in some of our higher performing campuses, so that it is rolled out in every single campus. And then the continuous improvement is, of course, something that is a lever for any educator, right? How are we continually looking at this system and improving it? So it's an exciting initiative. As I said, it's a theory of action, and it has a proposed, I mentioned the rollout, but these are kind of the phases of that. That's not yours. These are the phases of that. And really what we're looking at, that's kind of hard to read. But in 21-22, it was refining, it was developing. In 22-23, it's a pilot rollout where they roll out all 4 of the components. And then in 23-24, we're going to go all out in Texas. And so it's an exciting theory of action. It's a little bit different. It's new, and I like it because it's really does create that kind of vertical alignment all the way from the board table, which in most theory of actions, we kind of left out that vision part of it, right? We're implementing to get to an impact, but we hadn't brought in the goal process into that. And so that's what's new about this. Any questions?
So what does this mean for us? Like, what are we supposed to be looking for? How are we preparing for?
So for you guys, when we go back to, from a board perspective, you really want to look at how are these showing up in your district? How are these levers being pushed on, and how can you bring them into your board work, right? So for instance, you could have a constraint around human capital systems, right? Like, are we retaining our teachers? How are we hiring? How are we recruiting? You can have a constraint around high quality materials and access. Like, are they being distributed? Are our teachers prepared to deliver this in every classroom? High quality instruction. Continuous improvement is all about progress measurement. So that's part of the governance framework. And then the support for students' readiness to learn is really about improvement, right? It's about academic success. And what do those look like? So every one of these levers plays into your board work, and the way you guys would see this come into the boardroom will be on goal progress measurements, constraint measurements, innovation, all of those things, and they should show up in your monthly reports. Make sense?
Identified as such?
They certainly can be identified by the levers. It's this, as I said, doesn't completely roll out until the 23-24 school year. And as far as I know, you're not in the pilot.
We're not.
So, but what you guys have done over the last kind of year is build the structure in your governance to lay the groundwork for this and for your superintendent.
Sorry, but they are in our constraints, so if you want me to, I could read a few of them, if you want me to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so like, the one under 3,
Mhm.
this is the one that you sent out like a month ago.
Right, and we're gonna finalize those tonight after
So it
this.
says percent of staff responding positively to the overall quality of Jetson ISD will increase. So that falls under the, the capital management. Then specifically to the high quality instructional materials and assessments, percent of staff indicating that they have the necessary materials and resources. So that one's on there. And then the support and readiness is on here too. Let me just find it real quick. PLCs is also on there for student readiness and continuous improvement of instruction is on there. So they're woven into it. If we need to change the language, we can to reflect that, but it is, those are woven into it.
Right. And you will see these on your progress reports. And if you want the levers to be addressed, we can certainly look at that. So if you guys go to, I give you a handout that has a monitoring calendar. So these are your contacts, and I gave you this information in case you need to ask TEA about this or any more. And I'm happy to get you any other information. As I said, this is still in its initial phase.
Okay.
But I think we're laying the groundwork. So when we look at our progress accountability, our monitoring progress, it's your monitor calendar, which you have a copy of on your desk. This right here. So this is something that we want to finalize. Hopefully, that'll be the last piece of the Lone Star governance that we'll put in place. And really, when we think about that, what would it feel like for you guys as board members to know months in advance what's going to be rolled out in the meeting, what's going to be discussed, how do you prepare, and your superintendent as well. And so this would map out your entire year and say, okay, on these, in these meetings, we're going to talk about these goals and these constraints. And we're going to, you can add trainings, you can do other things in there. You'll have adequate time to prepare for them. You'll know if there's issues coming up. This is an opportunity for your superintendent to come in and say, we're going to talk about some of these things. And so everybody is on the exact same page. And we talked about this, that this would be the culmination, is to have a very comprehensive monitoring calendar. And so when you guys,
So this G5, is it referring to this number 5 right here?
no, this
No.
is just
A goal.
This is generic.
This is generic.
Oh,
Yeah, it's just a generic
Got
one.
it, okay,
Yeah, we'll build one that is specific to,
got it.
and that's really the monitoring calendar, just like the progress measures are owned by the superintendent. Because you know when you measure things, you know when is a good time to report on this data. So yeah, so you would be the one who would build this with your team. But then we would roll it out, and our goal is to have this out by August, so done. Well, actually, in July, I would like to have it done, or June, to get this rolled out so that next year this framework is complete and it's in place with this monitoring calendar. So why don't you guys just kind of lean in and talk to each other, and what other things, when you look at this, what other things would you want on this? What other things would you want to know in advance that are coming up for your calendar? Think about things that you've talked about in the past, because we can add those kind of things. This is your calendar. This is simply an example. It doesn't have to look exactly like this. So maybe, I'm sorry.
Just to refresh everybody's memories, I doubt everybody had it with them. At the very beginning, I had given this schedule out to the board in regards to these were the things that we were going to talk about. So just as a reminder, like in September, we did enrollment and mobility because we're starting the year. In October, we did post-secondary information, advanced academics, enrichment teachers, equal opportunity report. In November, we did bilingual ELL and systems of great schools. December, Kate, first report for public hearing. January was section 504. February was beginning of the year and middle of the year comparison and a taper report. March, we did SEL, and then tomorrow we'll do the technology. And then we'll also do child nutrition.
Child nutrition, yeah.
So thinking about that list and this framework and this calendar, maybe just talk to your shoulder buddy or three, and like, how would you want to see that list and this calendar integrated?
And also, if they don't want to see this, I'm totally fine with them not wanting, if they don't want to, I just want it as a reminder.
Yeah.
I think we need it as a guide.
Well, some of that will come in a different way here. For example, the comparison of beginning of year, middle of year scores would be a goal progress monitor when we're looking at that. It might actually, we're looking at more than just the 2 areas we wrote the goals for, though. So it kind of, that data covers more than just those goals. So,
Yeah,
You know?
I mean, and if you look at those 3 points
Yeah.
up there, so on that calendar,
right,
monitors each student outcome goal at least 4 times per year. So we're gonna look at
Right.
data a lot. Monitors no more than 2 student outcome goals per month, so that we're not overweighing it, right? That we wanna spread it out, we want you to be able to have the time to digest that information so that you can really ask good questions and think about how that looks in resourcing, how that looks in facilities, how that looks in all of an innovation, right? So really taking a look at that. And that that the goals span 5 years, right? So this calendar will repeat itself and repeat itself for 5 years. So you will actually know what you're gonna talk about 2 years,
From now.
November, 2 years from now, right? And so that's really critical because it starts to create a cadence of monitoring that is systematic. It also is a public-facing tool that allows your community to know what you're discussing. So are there other things that you think should be included on there that you don't see? Anything? Take a couple minutes, take a look at it, maybe even talk with each other.
the EEOC report is not on here.
No.
And that
but
is
would
something
that-
I'd like us to be sure that we look at every year. Because
That's
that goes to the
October.
human capital systems.
Is EOC mandated, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess the question is, all the mandated stuff will still appear?
Will definitely still.
Okay.
Okay.
And
So-
probably when we put something like that on, we'll correlate it with the constraint that is on
Right.
teachers, right? Or so that
Mhm.
there is correlation, and that still becomes, when you look at this is about all of the items that are really directly tied to your board work,
Right.
right? And it takes some of the things that aren't directly tied to board work out of here. So presentations that don't align with goals, don't align with constraints, unless specifically requested by board members, will not show up on this calendar. Your superintendent will present based on the calendar. Now, the second part of that is the monitoring report. So if you flip that over, this is just an example. Once again, we can customize this to however you want it. But when you look at this, if you were to see this and really take a look at this, what questions might come up for you on this? If this were your report, I just want you to take 5 minutes to look at this example. This is not, well, it is one of your goals. These are not the right numbers for you guys, right?
Right.
This is just a sample. But just looking at this, what kind of questions might you want? You would get this in advance with your agenda. And so what kind of questions might you have for your superintendent and team? And what kind of information do you think that your superintendent will be bringing to you when you take a look at this?
Just to deconstruct this, so I'm sure. So theoretically, if this was truly our data, this is the goal progress measure overall,
Right?
and then would it be broken down by campuses, by feeder patterns?
It can be broken down however you want it. So this could be an example of a very small district that maybe only has 2 campuses.
Okay.
But for you that have multiple campuses, you can break it down by feeder pattern. You can break it down all the way down by campus. I would suggest that you keep it as high level as you can unless you see an indicator of a challenge.
So keep it at district data, district-wide.
Keep it at district data, and then when you start to, like for instance here, this orange, this red economically disadvantaged number, that's where I'd want to see, I'd have questions about that. I'd want to see reports on that. I'd want to see like, okay, what are we doing to address that? How are we moving that? I might have questions about the other, the special ed, the
Special ed is
EL,
what I was
right?
thinking,
Because those are yellow. Are we on track? Are we going to be on track? Are we initiating something? But I'm not necessarily going to ask a lot of questions about our African American students in this goal specifically because the
They're
green
on
would
target.
indicate we're okay.
Yeah, so the green
We're doing
is on
okay.
target.
Right.
So yeah, I would say dyslexia, EL, and spec ed.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And, that may be why there's evidence in future plans down here on the economic disadvantage. So that's where you might say, you know what, I want to see where the challenges
Right.
are. I want to see the campuses that are being challenged on here, because that's when you can start to do some root cause analysis as well. Is that about accessibility? Is that about, right? What is the challenges going on here that we could address and that your superintendent can address? So this kind of gives you that framework to start to ask the good questions. And it may be that Dr. Ball comes back and says, you know what, we're struggling here, and here, and we need to implement a different strategy, and that strategy is going to cost us money. So now we've tied outcomes to resources, right? And that becomes alignment. That has to do, maybe it's a new curriculum, maybe it's a new intervention, maybe it is tied to the previous levers that we saw there. Like, are we struggling to get the teachers that we need in these classrooms? How are we implementing those strategies? So this is really, these 2 pieces to me are incredibly critical for you as a board because they connect what's happening on the ground with the vision and values that you guys have set in this board.
This is a good document.
Yeah, this is a very good template, I like this.
You like
Easy,
that?
yeah, it's easy to read and organized and just refer to it.
And once you see this consistently, every board meeting, and you might get, 3 of them because you might be looking at 2 goals and a constraint, right? Once you get those and they're consistent, it's also really liberating for you and your team because you know exactly what you're going to talk about, right? If you're here, you probably knew about that beforehand, right? And so you're going to bring in those structures, those presentations that say, this is how we're addressing this. This is also a place where you could say, we're doing so well moving the needle for our African American kids. We want to show you what we've done to move this needle and how we might implement it to address the needs of other student populations and other kids. That's also where we get to celebrate the work that is successful, right? So it's not just about looking at things that aren't working, it's about scaling things that are working. That make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk a little bit more about this later tonight after the ISO, but it's good that they bring it into the ISO because it ties all of those things together. So, any questions about monitoring? Okay, so that's our first objective. This is how we tie it to our school boards, right? So now we're going to kind of talk about the accountability system. And many of you guys have been around a long time and you know about the accountability system, but it's complicated. And, you know, new board members especially, and board members who don't come from an education background struggle to understand the accountability system and how it ties together. And I think it warrants, and it is important that every year, every 2 years, the board reviews this information and understands what that looks like. So, you know, thinking about accountability, how do you guys experience accountability in your everyday life, in your jobs, in your life, I mean, we think of accountability as a stick, but it doesn't have to be a stick, right? It can be the carrot. It can be the impetus we need to create improvement, to create the next level, to level up, right? So when you guys think about accountability, how does it show up in your lives?
I'm evaluated at work every year.
I'm sorry?
My performance is evaluated at work every year.
Yeah, performance evaluations.
I have to get blood work for my annual, my annual physical. That's some accountability that I do, yeah.
That's right. I mean,
Yeah.
who's holding you accountable?
Me and my doctor.
That's right. There you go. You know, some of it is self-accountability.
Yeah.
Self-accountability, but you're right. Or maybe, you know, your family is holding you accountable to making sure you're healthy. What else? What other ways?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. From my retired mind, I think about, and what I do on a daily basis, my health. That's what I think about. And I'm keeping myself accountable, but I also have an accountability buddy that I work out with to help keep me accountable because I get lazy.
Right.
But yeah, I think about that in my everyday life.
And do you find that accountability buddy is productive? Is that helpful for you?
Absolutely, way more than me.
See, now you can kind of think you're all accountability buddies, right? In holding the district to that vision and values so that our students have the opportunity to improve, right? Accountability buddies. That's not such a daunting. Now accountability is friendly.
Yeah, because it used to be what she said,
Right.
being evaluated every year.
Yeah.
And I guess as board members, now the accountability is on us because also we have to self-evaluate.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Uh-huh.
You have to hold yourselves accountable for leaning into this framework and your board constraints and holding yourselves accountable for student outcomes because you guys are the ones who own it.
Right.
You're the ultimate responsibility for that. So how else? How else does accountability show up in your life? Guys?
So we have annual goals and targets, then we break those down into quarterly, then monthly, then weekly assessments. So I actually evaluate my team on a monthly basis, and then on a quarterly, and then on an annual. That way I know if I need to course correct myself, or the team member, or the team itself, or their support structures, I know about it beforehand. So at the end of their evaluation, if they didn't get what they needed, it's largely on me, because I already knew beforehand. And then we break things down into goals, so like existing business, so client retention, customer success rates, and then new business attainment. So everything's like very well structured. That way, everybody's in the know of how things are measured and how things are going. Our leadership team visits once a week on Tuesday mornings. We have full briefings, and then we visit with our own team members weekly or bi-weekly, depending on what the topic is. So again, like that scheduled approach, and then those key performance indicators, those KPIs, are set in place for that kind of really strong approach. Like nobody can claim ignorance, and nobody can claim lack of support, including the leadership team. Because if my team is failing, it's on me because I haven't asked my president or the board. That's how we structure. So it's like a very rigid yet beneficial approach.
So it sounds like you have a monitoring calendar.
Yeah.
Very similar approach, right? You know what's coming up, you know what you're gonna be talking about, and so that's helpful. That's helpful to your team.
Mhm.
Right? How about you?
Evaluations on my job,
Mm-hmm.
that I,
Right.
get valuable feedback from. And also a doctor, having goals and, setting goals and talking about my doctor about, my progress and different things. So,
Yeah, and accountability can also show up and for me, through the last year of transition, for me, I had an accountability coach. I had a coach that just kept me on a transition plan. It was a personal coach that helped me think through, not capitulate, not, it was, not that I couldn't, all of us can hold ourselves accountable, but sometimes having that accountability buddy, or that some person who's gone through this process, who is outside of it, right? Talking to you, advising you, holding you accountable to benchmarks and steps in a process is really great. And that's really, I think, part of, too, how it shows up in the boardroom, right? There's thought partnership in here. There's accountability to each other. There's accountability to yourselves. There's accountability to your superintendent and vice versa. And mostly, there's accountability to your children, to the students of Judson ISD and how that shows up, and the parents and the families. And so that's incredibly important, so that cycle of accountability. So, just like, did you have something you want to add? Okay. So just like when we talk about that accountability in this boardroom, Texans want accountability. Texans wanted accountability and a system of accountability, and not all states have it. So Texas is fairly unique in this kind of structure that they've created. And why do you think this is important? Why do Texans want an accountability system for their public schools? What do we want?
That they're, teachers, staff, those they're doing what they're supposed to do to teach students. Making sure they're learning and making sure they're safe.
Yeah. We want to know our kids are getting what they need to get to make the choices in their life to be successful, right? We know that's what it'll take to build a strong Texas, and we want to make sure our students have those choices. So we're going to hold our public education systems accountable. And in order to do that, we need a consistent measure of accountability across the state. Now, as we'll talk about a little bit when we get to STAAR, STAAR is not a perfect assessment. It is constantly being looked at. So, sometimes I will talk to community members about accountability, and people will get very, salty about the STAAR test and accountability, and they lump everything into it, right? Everything is bad because we hate that STAAR test. And so then, we have to kind of unpack it, right? And talk about why do we need accountability? Why is this system? And how does the STAAR work? What is it even measuring? And what is it designed for? And what isn't it designed for? Because it is not, when we have a yardstick, what do we use a yardstick to measure?
Length.
What?
Length.
Length, height, right? We don't use a yardstick to measure weight.
Right.
No.
Right? So the STAAR test is the same thing. We're going to use it to measure a very specific thing, but we're not going to use it to create, like, this is the value of our students, or things like that. And that's important to remember. And so when we start with this, we really look at the TEKS, right? So the TEKS are kind of the first building block. And you guys who are educators, you probably know all about the TEKS, right? And the TEKS were designed by teachers. And they really are, this particular model, this particular question, talks about algebraic reasoning, right? And it's that kind of 1 to 2 step problem solving, addition, subtraction, whole numbers, using all these models. Now, what is this measuring, first of all? What is this TEK measuring?
Understanding how number system works.
That's
Basically.
right, the process,
Right.
right? They're not interested in the answer.
No.
They're interested,
In the
do
procedure.
you understand
Can you
that
solve for
process?
it?
It's a reasoning skill,
Mhm.
right? And so understanding that is incredibly important. Why would I want my child to understand that or to have that ability as a parent?
Why?
Why?
It's
Why
a-
would I want my kid to be able to do this?
It's a foundational skill that's gonna
Foundational
traverse.
skill.
Yeah.
It's a building block, right? And so while it seems simple, it's incredibly important as they move down the pipeline. It's incredibly important as they move down. And so that's why that's so important that the TEKS are mastered and that the STAAR test evaluates the mastery of those TEKS. Right? And so that's really what we're talking about. When the STAAR test is looked at, it says, did our kids get this basic skill set? And can it be measured? And if they didn't, then a teacher knows from the results of the STAAR test, I need to hit this again. I didn't hit this well. Or, you know what? Maybe kids didn't feel good that day, but we're gonna make sure they get this building block. And that's a really important way of looking at it. Yeah.
Can I interrupt you real
You
quick?
absolutely.
There's a funny thought. This is just comic relief. I visited a classroom today where some kids were preparing for their STAAR, and they were doing some algebraic equations. And so I asked them what they were doing, and they said, "We're getting ready for STAAR." And I said, "Oh, good. Then you're preparing. You're getting yourself ready." And one little girl said, "I don't know why. Because my mom said, all I need to know how to do is balance a checkbook." And I said, "Then you need to know this."
That's right. That's right. And, and I think it's also, when you think about it, so my daughter is dyslexic.
Mhm.
And she went to a private preschool through 2nd grade. And she was really good at faking it and memorizing words.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You learn that.
And so I didn't realize until she was probably entering 1st grade that she was faking it,
Mhm.
right? And so when I went back to the school, I said, I don't think she can read. I'm pretty sure she can't read. And so in that particular school, there was no standard evaluation, right? There was nothing, she was faking them out too. And there was no standard evaluation that was aligning that. Not that preschoolers are taking STAAR tests, but you're thinking about that kind of formative evaluation. When I moved my daughter into public school, that dyslexia was consistently measured, right?
Right.
Her ability to grasp things, to read, to think, those all of a sudden through formative assessments and through STAARs and through TEKS and teaching that showed up. It showed up in a public education system because we had an accountability system that said, we got to make sure our kids are getting all these things. And so I think that's an important component because as a parent, I want to know, I trust that my school system, whether it's a private school or a public school, is teaching my kid the basics, right? Like, she should know how to read. At some point, she's going to need to know how to read, and so that, I think, is a really important way of thinking about the accountability system and the values, and thinking about just the TEKS and the STAAR. And so when we think about it, the STAAR is designed to measure student mastery of the TEKS, right? So the STAAR math test is designed to describe how much math students know and are able to do. That's what it is. It's not designed as a formative assessment. It's not a progress measure all the way through the year. It's a one day, one test, right? It's an assessment. And it's certainly not about describing a child's worth or value. And, when we start to assign that, when we put too much into the STAAR, where we're only measuring that, and we're not looking at formative assessments, we're not looking at any of these other progress measures or multiple levels, whether we're evaluating teachers, whether we're evaluating students, whether we're evaluating superintendents, there has to be multiple measures of evaluation because one test is not good enough. But one consistent test is what a big giant state with lots of different schools and lots of different school districts needs to evaluate. Now, I think STAAR is being redesigned. It has been designed by teachers, and it is in a, it is in a redesign process again, and you can be a part of that if you want. But I don't think, the other part of an accountability system like Texas has is that it's stable, it's consistent, and it has the ability, I think you and I, Jenny, discussed this. Actually, the Texas system has the ability for any school to get an A, right? So when you go to the A through F system, which is kind of the next, this is kind of a wonky slide, which you probably can't see up there, but you can maybe see on your deal, which just talks about kind of those different types of assessments. And those different types of assessments are important to you guys as board members. Why?
Because it's different data, different things that we can evaluate to see are we meeting our progress measures.
Exactly. Different multiple levels, multiple levers. All of those different things that your superintendent and her team and educators are doing all the time, but that data comes into you guys as board work as progress. Like, how are we indicating progress? How are we indicating progress? I'm going to get back to what I was going to say to you about, but I want to get to the A through F system on that. And so this is kind of an interesting chart that talks about when those things are measured, what happens. So you could have formative assessments at any point, right? That's progress that can be brought in at any point. Then there's benchmarks, interim assessments, and of course summative assessments is what STAAR's about. We talk, I think you've got like math data, or that's kind of a beginning, middle, end of the year kind of assessment, and those are incredibly critical as well. Any questions so far? I know I'm bouncing through this pretty fast. I think you all probably have a lot of it. And so then the student performance part of STAAR is, these are the 4 levels, and we talk a lot about meets, right? And we talk about meets because of that bullet at the bottom. It means there's a 60% chance of post-secondary success without remediation, which is basically the same as an ACT. So this is the closest that we can align all the way up to an ACT, is a meets standard on STAAR. When you get to masters, you have a higher percentage chance. When you're at approaches, then the likelihood of a student needing some type of remediation to get them ready to be successful in college or career is going to be needed. And so when you guys set your goals, for the most part, you set them at that meets grade level, because that's the kind of the minimum level of getting our kids the closest to college ready that we can do without having them at the master's level. And it's the bulk. A lot of our students sit in that kind of,
that's the
right?
best.
They're moving into that meets. If we can get them into the meets, then they got a great chance of success. Right? Does that make sense? So when, we were doing the root cause analysis and we were talking about our goals, that's why we kept moving it towards meets. What is the meet standards on this? Where are our kids? Where are our kids here? And this is why. And so this is kind of just that alignment, which I just said is, what we're doing is trying to move this all the way to the ACT or the SAT. So are they college ready? What are they doing? We start with the STAAR alignment from 3rd grade all the way up into the EOCs. And that's how it's built. So every STAAR question directly aligns to the TEKS for that grade or subject that's being assessed. And it builds all the way up. And then the idea behind that entire system is that it gets the majority of our kids ready for college or career or military readiness. So this is kind of, I'm going to show you this, even though it was really a little bit for us, but this is really about that that educators are key to designing these assessments. Educators are going to be the highest, I mean, they are the experts, right? They understand what's happening in the campus, what's happening in the classroom, what's happening with students directly. So keeping them involved in these assessment, as we redefine assessments, as we build new assessments, is critical. It's critical. And so now there has been some legal stuff that have come around, and they are going to be redesigning some of the STAAR work, as I said. STAAR was created out of a legislative movement in 2019. They made some changes, and we're going to continue to refine that. And there's some, I think I have some things, like this next slide is really about that redesign. So what are we doing? What are we looking at on that redesign? The hope, I think, for educators and for legislators is that it is not a complete rebuild, because we've gone through that over and over and over the last 20 years. And part of that is that it's a stable system, a stable test, so that it's more of refining and making sure the alignment is better aligned with curricular needs of kids in a 21st century, in a 22nd century, right? And so what does that look like? Are any of you guys involved in the STAAR redesign? Yeah. Any of the educators in the room?
I was thinking about applying for the social studies one, but I heard the time commitment was way too long, and I was like, I can't drive up to Austin that much.
Yeah, it's a pretty big lift.
Yeah.
But interesting, and I'm glad that they've spread it to more and more teachers now. More and more educators are involved. So this is just more of what is to come, and I'm happy to share any of that information if you are interested in that. Talk about it. So the A through F system is kind of that last piece of the puzzle for accountability, right? And we've talked about this as well, that there are 3 domains involved in the A through F system. And so how do those pieces fit together, and what is important? And then those 3 domains combine for an overall grade. So when we talk about student achievement, we're talking about that STAAR lever, right? When we talk about school progress, we're talking about growth. And when we talk about closing the gaps, it's comparative work. And so that looks like, on student achievement, that is, for elementary schools and middle schools, it's only the STAAR test. There isn't anything else. But when we get to high schools, then we add in that CCMR. And that becomes, this is the student. And you can have the best of either. And I think that's important to note. Not always, boards don't always know that, right? If you're at a very high-performing district, an Alamo Heights or a Highland Park, or, you're at you are performing here, but you're not showing a lot of growth, right? Your kids are at the top and sometimes those school districts get very, status quo. They just hold on because their kids are performing okay. We don't need them to move them to the next level. I don't necessarily agree with it, but the accountability system says that a school district that has a very much different population than an Alamo Heights, who has kids who have maybe had other barriers put in front of them, if they're growing them at a much faster rate, even though they haven't attained this student achievement level, they get a higher grade. So growth is important, right? Growth is critical. And that, to me, is a sign of a really strong educator, right? Because, if you're a teacher and you're sitting in a classroom with kids who are already high-performing, there are challenges there, right? There are challenges about.
But not as many as there would be.
If you're in a classroom
It's a
trying
different
to
challenge.
get kids.
Yeah.
It's a different challenge,
different
right? But they're both important and
Absolutely.
they're critical.
Every kid deserves at least a year's worth of growth.
And so many school districts across the nation and states don't give this option. It's
Yeah.
basically only on student achievement, which means that there are
Yeah.
always gonna be the same schools that are at the top of the pyramid. And that's where it becomes something that you and I talked about, Jenny, is it becomes a distributed system, right? Not everybody gets to be in a school, but that is actually not the case in the Texas accountability system. In the Texas accountability system, the way that it is built is every school has the opportunity to be in a school. There are no, it's not, one has to be at the bottom in order to create the curve, right? This is not the way that this system is built. And I think that's critical, because, when you think about like the old system that we had, even with the IR schools, right? You could be you could be a passing school, a school that is acceptable, and 70% of your kids weren't on grade level. And so, this is a better system in my mind, because of the way it distributes it. Any questions or any thoughts, especially you guys that are really, jump in to Dr. Ball, you live and breathe these kind of systems. Anything jumping out? Anything I'm missing?
No.
So this is how they get to that grade. As we said, it's kind of that 40%, and then 20%, and that gets your grade, and they build it into a system. So the STAAR component is worth 40%, and so that's important to understand, and it's at, meets and above, and so they translate that into the raw. Graduation rate is still 20%. And then the college and career readiness component is another 40%. So are we getting our kids, first of all, do they have the basics? Are we testing them for the basics? If you think about this in terms of, an innovative school system that has, between 3 years old and 10 years old, we're going to make sure they have every basic they need, right? Every academic basic they need. And then in middle school, we're going to start to teach them leadership skills. We're going to start to let them explore career pathways. We're going to start to engage them at a different level. They're going to start to do different things. And then in high school, they begin their path to career in college or military. They begin that pathway. And you think about that in structure, so this system measures how well a district is addressing each one of those components. Make sense?
Yes.
So this is something we've already talked about, so I'm not going to linger on it. When we talk about college ready, these are the things that we're measuring. This is what we're looking for. So when you have progress measures that have to do with AP enrollment, AP completion, you're looking for that 3 or 4, minimum of 3. Do you know why we're looking for that 3? What does the 3 also do for kids?
Get some college credit.
Gives them college credit. So it becomes a way for kids to get free college credit.
And they bypass developmental ed at that
I'm sorry?
point? They bypass developmental ed at that point?
Yeah. And dual credit is the same thing. Who are we enrolling in dual credit? Are they successful? It's another way of making sure that our kids are getting opportunities to gain the advantage of college without having to pay the money and without having to go to college, right? So that's kind of the college ready, the associate's degree or the early colleges. All of those things are incredibly critical. When we go to career ready, we kind of have some differences and changes, right? We used to have kind of these career pathways, and kids could go through those pathways, and I think the thinking behind eliminating those was that, those pathways weren't necessarily leading to anything tangible for students. And so now we've really revamped that, and we're looking at more of the industry-based certification. What is that? What does it look like? Or to get a level 1 or 2 certificate. Or to actually, more and more high schools are bringing in technological and career partners, business partners, to help them build a curriculum that actually gets them a job at the end of this. And, that to me is those are innovations that have changed so many different school districts and changed dramatically the lives of students who, for whatever reason, whether that it's by choice, whether it's because of financial or family obligations, don't have the opportunity to go to college, but can utilize their high school to build on a career and come out earning money, earning real money. And I think that's going to be the push as we move through this system, right? Is going to be, how are we making sure that these are earned, living wage jobs that we're preparing them for? And, there's a lot of pushback right now for college, and what does that look like in the cost of college? And so I think we're going to see more and more emphasis put in our K through 12 systems of what can we do, or collaborations with community colleges, and like what can we do to make sure that we're not missing any opportunity to get our kids those living wage jobs right away, because we also know that those living wage jobs can lead to college in the future if they want a higher advancement opportunity, can lead to all different things. Now so many industries are paying for college, I went to college based on my employer's money, or finished my college based on my employer's money. And there's a funny story that goes with that, just to break some things up. So I started working, I finished 3.5 years of college at Trinity, and then decided, and I went on up to Dallas, and I knew I needed to get a job, so I got a job at a bank as a teller. And my bank said, after about 2 years of working there, we'll pay for you to finish up your degree, and then you can go into the credit training program, be a lender. I was like, really? And they, yeah, we'll pay. So I went to University of Texas, Dallas, and the bank never said, like, what that degree had to be in, right? So I went to the thing and said, I was a journalism major at Trinity. I went to UTD, and I said, what's the fastest degree I can get? And they said, well, if you get a fine arts minor, then we can give you a communications degree. So I took 12 hours of acting classes, and I'm pretty sure that the bank thought they were accounting.
ACT, right?
And I still went into, hey, I think those acting classes paid off for me in the bank. But any rate, that was a good way of getting a degree for nothing, and for no money. They were hard classes.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm not recommending that our students game the system like that. I'm just saying that there are so many.
But we
there are
do
lots
give
of
them
opportunities.
those opportunities, for them to find their niche.
You guys are some of the few that know that. Don't share.
Mum's the word.
Now it's on recording.
I was gonna say, the whole
Oh,
world
yeah.
Oops, forgot about that. It gets so intimate with you guys. So anyway, career ready, and then of course military ready, which is many of our kids see advancement and for their careers in our military. So how are we preparing for them? And we better be preparing them in the exact same way we're preparing our kids for college and for career, right? Because it's our kids' choices. And so that's really critical as well. All right, where are we? What's the time here? Good. Okay, so I'm not going to go into this, but this is something information that we can talk about in the boardroom, which is those bonuses. I know that Dr. Ball has probably worked on it, but there are money tied to the college and career readiness, and so they have to do with these kind of bases, which is, extra funding, right? So when we get to school progress, that's kind of that second domain, and there are a lot of ways that they can measure that, but that's kind of comparing them year to year, right? How are our kids doing year to year, and how are our kids doing in comparison to other kids, right? Academic growth, relative versus relative performance. What does that look like? And that's where they can have the best of either, what we talked about. And school progress, which is the academic growth, and this is a very wonky little chart that I don't know that board members need to understand exactly how this looks, but it is important when that progress reports comes that that we know how our kids moving and growing, and what does that look like? And that's something that, you know, we talked about it when we looked at the progress report, right? And Dr. Ball can bring that in and show you, our kids are moving from this level to this level, and this is where they're moving, and this is how we're getting this. And then school progress performance, which is, this is really comparing apples to apples, right? Schools that look like each other are being measured against each other. So that kind of helps to make sure that we know, when we look across Texas, that these are kids that, you know, are very similar to these kids over here, and how are we doing comparatively. Any questions? Questions on any of that? And the third domain is closing the gaps. And what are we talking about when we're talking about closing the gaps? When we see that, why are we seeing data disaggregated by every student population? I mean, it is required as part of the state. You have to report on it to the DEA. The board has their goals. We'll see their goals disaggregated by student population, because it is critical for us to know, you know, how are we doing with every single student, and what are going to meet the needs of every student. So if we are seeing a gap that gets broader and broader between our African American students and our emerging bilingual students, then what are we doing differently? What are we trying to do? If our economically disadvantaged kids are lagging behind, then what is the root cause of that, and what can we do differently to make sure we're closing those gaps? I think this is incredibly critical, and you know, in a space where equity has become kind of a political tool, what we're really talking about is, you know, this was from George Bush way back, No Child Left Behind, right? All of this is about, what are we giving our children, and how are we creating the conditions for each one of them to be successful? And if we're not looking at that data, if we're not looking at it disaggregated, and board members, if you don't know that data, then there is no lever here, right? Then we've left off a piece of accountability, and that's critical. So, you know, that's what this closing the gap, and it's part of the score for a school. So if you're doing well in closing those gaps on any of those student populations, then your score is going to go up, and rightly so. Any questions on that? Make sense? Okay. So when we look at this, you've seen these student groups, and they'll be listed on your reports, your progress reports. It's any student population that has 25 or more children in it, has to be measured, has to be reported. So the district is already doing that. So bringing that data into you guys is just sharing that data. You're probably already getting to see it, and how are those things weighted, and how are they, and you need to look at them across every goal. Not just the HB3 goals, but every goal. And you also need to consider those, in my mind, when we look at the progress on our constraints, we also need to look at them from an equity mindset as well, if possible, to see how are we making sure that is addressing this, closing the gap. Because the constraints is really a value-based tool to get to better student outcomes. It's just not a measurable of student outcomes. So that total target equals A through F, and that's where we get it. And that's kind of that last piece, So we've got our TEKS that are our building blocks, our STAAR, that is our single assessment, certainly not the only assessment, and boards know that we're not going to look at that as our only assessment. And then we have that all feeds up into our A through F measurement. And why is A through F good? I mean, why, not the system, but the letter grades. Why did they pick A through F?
Parents understand.
Parents understand them. Parents get it. They didn't really get IR. They didn't get what that meant, right? And so they do understand this. And I think the more we can shine lights on this system, the more we can shine lights on, with parents especially, on like all of these domains. This is not just a single test that gives you this. This is what's doing, this is what we're doing, and this is how we're moving our schools up the ladder. I know that we had a constraint in there that talked about You know, we're not gonna have D through F schools. We're gonna try and eliminate those. So what are we doing to do that? Sharing that with our parents takes some of the fear away when they see that letter grade associated with a school that they care about,
Yeah.
that they love.
And also incoming, new parents into the district.
Right?
They, when they know where they're moving and what district they're moving into, they want to make sure their kid's going to the best school.
Yeah.
So they look at those left grades.
So, absolutely, absolutely. So really critical. So that's kind of the accountability system in a nutshell. And this is where you can see it all. And the data's all on the website. So let's take a quick break. It's not quite 5 o'clock. So we'll take a quick break if that's okay, maybe 15 minutes, 10 minutes? What do you guys think?
10 minutes.
Yeah.
10 minutes.
10 minutes.
10 minutes it is.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Does anybody need anything?
No, I'm good.
Got a snack box here.
Aren't those medals cute? I think that's adorable. Yeah.
We
We
got
got-
Fiesta medals from
From-
communities and schools.
Oh.
Oh, I hadn't looked
Yeah,
this
it's
up.
super cute. The little fringe on them.
Where do you guys keep your medals?
I have a drawer they all go in.
Because I'm thinking I need something.
We made a runner
Okay.
Oh, that's
for our table.
That's a good
and all of them are-
idea.
Yes, thank you.
I have a runner on my table, so that would be a good idea. That's a good idea.
Now, some people would that have, those, like, the fabric. Yeah,
Oh,
the
a sash.
sashes.
Yeah,
You could do that and hang it somewhere,
that's what,
too,
yeah.
you know.
Something where I can put them all together.
Actually ever go to a Fiesta event again.
I think those days for me are over.
Small local one, maybe. Somebody had a vest, too. I saw that. So then you can get your mannequin and put it up.
So which one of your colleagues wrote in,
His name is Jorge Rodriguez.
okay,
A different Jay Rodriguez.
Yeah, another J.
another J.
And there's another Jenny in the group too.
Oh, my.
It's all kinds of confusing.
I remember one year I was teaching, I had 4 Jennifers in my class. It was really complicated.
Probably in the 80s or the 90s.
Early 90s.
They're probably my age now.
Early 90s, yeah.
The most popular
One was
girl name in
Jennifer, one was
1978.
Jenny, one went by her middle name, and then they decided. that-
Okay.
Oh, the four decided.
Decided what
okay.
they'd be called.
Oh, okay,
And
that's
then
kinda
one
cool.
wanted to be known by her last name, and so we could distinguish.
Really?
Yeah. Mhm.
At one point in my office of 20 people, we had 3 Jennies working. Like, it was a little.
I never encountered another Suzanne.
No.
in school.
Oh, wow.
One of them is Jennifer Rodriguez. So I occasionally get her email.
Oh, yeah, you told us that.
Right? Yeah. Oh, Jennifer Rodriguez.
Gotta double check who it is, huh?
Of course, no one's called Shitanya.
I was gonna say, it's not a name, I never had a student named that.
peaked all right, but not the best.
And there's not much they can do about it. Not good. Her back. So we went to the orthopedic specialist because I told you that hers had all. And he's like, looked at her MRI. And we talked about all her health issues. And he's like, you really should be avoiding surgery. You know, there are times when back surgery is indicated. But there's the chances of making it worse are fairly high with what she has.
That's the first time I've ever heard somebody say that a doctor says, I don't think it's a good idea.
Well, and he said, so, you know, when we told him the history that she had with the pain management clinics and getting the steroid shots, and he said, that's what you should do. And we said, but we don't have anybody, you know. So he gave us a referral. So we have an appointment next week.
Where is it?
It's on top of one. And so we said, who would you send your mother to?
Good question.
You know? And he's like, out of the three I named, any of them I would be.
Good
And he
question.
said, this one's closer, you know, that might be. And I said, we'll drive wherever we need to for the best person. And so, anyway, so we have an appointment next week with this.
Like on a daily basis, and when she's in pain, what does
helps?
she do? Yeah,
She uses some of those, you know, icy hot kinds of stuff.
But
Icing can help. Hot shower helps. And she's on gabapentin, which makes her dopey. But we don't want her to
take it every day.
Oh, she takes it 3 times a day.
3 times a day. So she's just like really.
It's bad.
Yeah, because you don't want it around a lot.
That's not a habit-forming drug, but I don't want her to be in pain, and that doesn't.
I know.
That doesn't get rid of the pain.
I see.
That just lessens it.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that, you know, we'll go for this consult, and then hopefully get her in PDQ
Yeah.
to get the injection.
Yeah.
Because it really, when she's had them done twice, and she got years of relief in between. So it's just really flared up bad right now. And
I wonder why more than that. Well, you think maybe it's just age.
there's changes in between the 2 MRIs when you look at, because it's spinal stenosis, which means narrowing of the spinal canal. And as you get older, the cushions between the discs, you know, the discs, those kind of lessen a little bit, and there's more compression than on the nerves.
Oh, no, already got
And
it.
so that's
That's
what
what she's feeling.
That's what it is. So, yeah.
I think about, you know, sleeping.
It's, the worst is in the mornings. She's
Getting
been
up out of the
motionless
bed.
all night. And, you know, getting up and moving
Yeah,
around
that's
helps a
hard.
little
Yeah,
bit,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know, when she
In
gets
the
to do that.
morning.
And then she gets in the hot shower, that really helps.
Yeah, yeah.
And then she puts her stuff on. And,
But she's, yeah.
But yeah,
Something to get going.
and, you know, she's used to being in pain, but you shouldn't have to be
But you
used to that.
shouldn't be used to that. Yeah.
How you guys doing?
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, bright red. Thank you. What time did things in, Miss Rodriguez? If you guys are on
We
break.
just started a break like 10 minutes ago or something.
We usually get this advocacy thing from Tassie.
I haven't looked.
You know, for the delegate
yeah.
assembly. If
Yeah.
you have any.
Say again.
Do you have read teeth?
Suggestions.
I do actually, usually, but I'm doing an elimination diet right now, so I'm not eating dairy, I'm not eating gluten, and I'm not eating added sugar. So like, I literally won't eat anything in there today.
This is a pretty
It was such a treat seeing you at
Circle
STAAR.
Oh yeah.
It made my entire evening.
Poor Nathaniel. We were there there till 9 o'clock because our thing didn't come on the agenda until
The people from Documation.
It wasn't that
Documentation
deep into
that we
it, but
partner
because
with
the
for
whole
our
press
print shop.
conference and everything, like, it took a long time to get there.
The invitations for the day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Weren't they pretty?
Are they all
I still have
different?
mine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the silver on that, that's the glitter.
I keep,
But yeah, they get printed at our print
Okay.
shop.
Yeah.
And
They do a good
they
job.
really do, they really do.
I was glad when we got in on the groundbreaking of the print shop and got
That was so
tour.
cool,
It
wasn't
was.
it? Yeah.
Okay, Betty, I'm gonna give you this back.
I'll bring it back tomorrow night. Empty it.
Yeah, I plan on leaving it with you, so it's in your capable hands.
Haven't seen the new article yet.
I was looking for the article.
It should have come out because they sent us a preview in our Facebook group.
Mm-hmm. But I
I
don't
kind of
see-
know what the spread looks like, but yeah,
Okay.
it's usually deep in.
Yeah,
Yeah, I know, I know, I was.
Well, there's a
Yeah, 'cause
table
you're-
Oh,
content.
it's this one. I think.
Okay,
Oh, no.
'Cause it doesn't
No, that's
say.
Patsy Conference. Never mind. No.
but I was looking for his name.
Yeah, because I've seen the spread and there's pictures and stuff too, so that's weird.
Maybe
I
it's gonna
wonder-
be in another one.
Maybe it's gonna be
another
in the
issue.
next one.
Yeah, this is April.
April, yeah, because, like, she did, let me see. Yeah, she posted 2 days ago, leadership tab beats, and then I posted something there.
That's legislators, and this is Ted's, and
Yeah, so they.
Yeah, I don't see.
so, I don't, not this
That's
one.
so weird.
It's not
Yeah,
this
'cause
issue.
this is, it says
Oh,
Fox
okay.
Presses, and that's what the spread was supposed to look like.
So it'll be May then, maybe.
Maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Does it
Yeah.
just come out, it comes out monthly?
Monthly.
And how
Mhm.
often do you all meet?
We have our last meeting next week.
Oh, we looked.
Okay,
Everybody ready to go?
you guys ready? We're gonna move on through this. Okay, so now we're moving on. We've already kind of addressed these first two objectives, so we have just kind of one more, which is really about monitoring progress and practices, emphasizing our students with disability and our emergent bilingual students. So we're going to go through this fairly quickly because we've talked about this a little bit, but there is some new language. And so why are we talking about these two populations, students with disabilities and emergent bilinguals? Because they represent two of the biggest student populations in Texas.
And also more challenging populations.
Right, challenging, and you know, they're people in these special populations are first and foremost people, right? They're kids. They're not just numbers. So what are we looking at? How are we making sure that we're addressing these are our children? And words do make a difference. So I love this quote: the difference between the right word and the almost right word is the difference between lightning and lightning bug, by Mark Twain. So, you know, what are we saying? What do we call, how are we referring to our kids? And how are we using that language? And while it's not going to be the perfect language for everyone, and not everyone will agree to the language, you know, the TEA and Texas has decided on new language when they're referring to these two student populations. And so what they're doing is they're really referring to person first language, right? So it's not disabled kids, right? Because that labels them, that names them. It's kids with disabilities, kids with learning differences, right? It's no longer ELL because what we're talking about now is, it's not about these kids are a deficit because they haven't learned English, but rather emerging bilinguals, what does their bilingualism bring to our districts? How does it enrich? How are we looking at that as asset-based language? And so that is really the change that you're seeing in this different terminology. So right now, you're going to see, still in all the documents, a lot of different language, but as you get reports on these special populations, you'll start to see this language come up more and more, so that we are really focusing on the people behind the numbers, the children behind these labels, and creating that. Does that make sense? And so that's the way we're going to just kind of go through this, because I think you all get it. When we talk about SPED students, a lot of times that was the language that was labeling our kids, right? If you were a SPED kid, I know that my child felt labeled because she had 504 services, and I think that changing first to person first language is such a great step to really humanizing our kids and whoever sits in this space, right? Because we have a lot of amazing people that are leading in our world, right? That have challenges that have put before them, and that doesn't define them, right? So we've changed SPED to students receiving special education services, right? Disabled students to students with disabilities. So you can see how that is going. Deaf students, so we no longer say they're a deaf student, right? They're a student who is deaf, or a student who is hard of hearing. And depending on these student populations, there may be disagreements to these terms, just like there are disagreements to racial terms, there are disagreements with ethnicities, but this is the language that Texas is moving forward with. So if we're a blind student, how would you might relabel that student so it's person first language?
Student who's visually impaired.
Student who's visually impaired. If you're a homeless student,
Someone experiencing homelessness.
exactly. We're talking about their experience, not the child. So very good. So that's what you're really looking at, and that's the change in this. And so a lot of this information this is all new to the ISO, because they want our boards to start using this language and also humanizing our students in these situations.
You look at them in a different way when you say it that way.
So it's critical. So we can have a discussion of this, but is there anything that pops out? Anything that you guys, what other terms you might have heard, or,
Another thing that I've heard too is like moving away from using the term subpopulations, because it means like less than, and instead using like demographic groupings.
Or student populations.
Or student population, yeah.
Exactly. It's a great point. So when we look at this data, we look at it through that. Leadership matters, right? If you in this room refer to that, then we'll shift how parents look at it, how students, how teachers, how students look at themselves, right? So that is just incredibly. And so, I think this is critical too, that when we think about education for students with disabilities, how has it evolved? I mean, think about when maybe you were little and you were in school, how did that show up? And how is it showing up now? We maybe haven't evolved all the way, but are we evolving? Are our children getting a different type of education? I know that, it was very common practice for pullout, right? Pullout kids were no longer, you weren't in the same class, we wouldn't be in the same class together, or my daughter, if she was pulled out for dyslexic work, or if, and that is a practice that we're starting to shift away, and we can also see that has less of an impact for kids than when they're pulled out than other ways of addressing student needs. And so when we think about it, it's not a place, it shouldn't be a separate school, it's the way we educate our kids, right? It's a support. So I'm going to show you this video. It's an interesting video because it talks about inclusion and that evolution. And I really thought it was a good one. I want you guys to see that. If it'll let me.
Welcome to 5 More Minutes, useful videos in 5 minutes or less that support the teaching and learning of all students. I'm your host, Shelley Moore. Today's topic is the evolution of inclusion. Okay, so you remember the dots? I know. I've shown you these before. But one colleague of mine suggested to me once, he goes, what if we didn't look at these as different concepts that we compare to each other, but instead as an evolution of time? It was totally brilliant. Now we could look at this timeline through the lens of any marginalized population, but to understand this timeline from the inclusion and disability perspective, we have to go back in time a little bit. Many of us know or are connected to someone who experienced institutionalization. It was even recommended to families by doctors. Although British Columbia was the first province in Canada to close down their institutions, there are still individuals living in these conditions across Canada today. The institutionalization movement is an example of exclusion. It separated individuals with disabilities from their families without choice. But the disability rights movement over the past 50 years, with the hard work of some incredible self-advocates and families, and maybe a little help from Geraldo Rivera, pushed communities to shift so that individuals of all abilities were welcomed and living in the same settings as their family and friends. This shift from institutions to communities, this was the start of the inclusive evolution. We have movement, but can we do better? Although many individuals are no longer excluded from their families and communities, they were, and let's be honest, they still are, expected to attend segregated schools or self-contained special education programs that are totally separate from the rest of the school community. And so parents started to ask some very good questions. You see, children with disabilities have siblings without disabilities, and families wanted all their kids to have equitable access to community-based education together. Kids started to be integrated into classrooms with their peers. They're in math together. They're in gym class together. They're eating lunch together. Kids are together. This is better. The shift from segregated to integrated schools and classrooms, this is the next step in the evolution of inclusion. We have movement, but can we do better? Well, this is where things get tricky, because integration, it doesn't take long to realize that just being together, it's not enough. Although in the same classroom, students with disabilities are often just that. They're physically in the classroom. They may sometimes have parallel activities, but mostly it's loosely connected classroom tasks. Now, you don't need me to tell you that just physically sharing space and time is enough to make you feel like you belong in a community. I mean, come on, there are Disney movies made about this. Breathing the same air is not enough. Do you remember the Titans? I do. The evolution from integration to inclusion is now the topic of many conversations in communities and schools around the world. How do we support individuals to be meaningfully included and not just physically integrated? It's not just about where kids go in their day, but why. What is the purpose to the places that they go? It's now school-based teams and staff that are asking questions about how to do this. How can we support purposeful and meaningful placements for kids with disabilities? In inclusive classrooms and schools, students aren't just present, but they have roles and responsibilities in their classrooms and also meaningfully connecting to their peers. This is inclusion. So there you have it, my friends. A brief history of inclusion in about 5 minutes. If this is interesting to you, though, definitely investigate your local history as well, because every community is in a different place in this journey, and it's so valuable to know where we've come from. The other thing, though, is looking at these visuals as a timeline. It really helped me to shift my own thinking from which bubble am I at or not at, and shift to more about where are we now in our inclusive journey and what's our next step. All of a sudden, the goal of inclusion becomes action-oriented and just feels so much more possible. We may not all be at the same place in the journey, but we can all move forward. We can do better, and so this is the question I'm going to leave you with today. Can we still do better? Do you think there's another evolution in inclusion? What might that be? How can we inch even more forward to make inclusion endemic? Thanks, Geraldo.
So, what do you think? What'd you gather from that? Other than the fact that you're very bubbly.
Yes, she is.
So when we think about that, as we move forward, what is that? Why are we bringing that in front of the board? What does the board have to do with this? This kind of evolution of inclusion.
All things.
What?
I just said all the things. I think I'm reflecting on a classroom visit that I did even today where just seeing how there are different environments that are going to be most conducive, and it all just depends on the child and their needs, and making sure those learning needs are met in like the least restrictive environment,
Right.
you know, so.
And so when we have a constraint that's set up or a goal around this, and we look at progress, some of the questions that you might ask are, how are we moving our kids in these student populations? How are we doing the old things? Or are we doing something new and innovative? And is it working better? And what does that look like? And being excited, and also resourcing it. If it's important, then we've got to invest in it, right? We've got to resource it, and that's where it comes really into the board.
Patricia, I'm just clueless as to why she was giving kudos to Geraldo Rivera.
I think
I
he
don't
was
know anything.
a
Does
big
anybody-
advocate for
Oh, okay.
Inclusion.
Okay.
inclusion, especially in students with disabilities and people with disabilities and institutionalized kids.
Okay. I didn't know that about it.
Way back in the, day.
Okay.
Maybe you're.
They saw that picture of them, so it's like, that's not an older photo.
Yes, it was, much older.
You
Yeah.
know, so we think about that, and I'm gonna,
Give me a
this is
story
just,
on it.
there's a lot of information in the ISO
okay.
about,
Need to Google.
kind of this new language, this new focus, and it really is to get boards to really start to focus in on how are we supporting it, how are we resourcing, how are we addressing it in different ways. Because you're right, any of the students could receive special education services no matter what they look like. So we make generalities, we put labels on kids. So how do we eliminate that? And there's about 605,000 kids in Texas that are in this category, and that's a lot of children, and I don't know how many are in your district, but that's something that
Is
you
that a
might pay
current
attention
stat?
to. Yeah.
A little over 23,000.
Total.
Total, oh,
No,
sorry.
how many are
That are
special ed?
spec ed.
Oh, it's, I have it, give me 1 second, I'll tell you exactly.
Hmm. Emergent, I need to start saying that more.
3,810, which is about 15%.
Wow.
So that's a lot of kiddos.
Yeah, it is.
Right? So
Higher than
paying
kiddo.
attention in the boardroom is
Mhm.
important to being able to giving the resources to your superintendent and your staff as they address those needs. Okay, so a lot of what they talk, bless you, is that kind of least restrictive environment. So this is, what are the ways that we're doing this to make sure our kids are included, are part of our school community, that they're in the least restricted environment, and how are we growing that? And so, there's kind of the mandates that go around this, which are the placement options. So, what are we doing to mainstream as many of those 3,000 kids as we can, and just offer more resources to them within the school that we have. And of course, there will be needs where kids maybe have to be self-contained, but how do we minimize that, and how do we create experiences where they get to be a part of the school population? And even the same with homebound students, like how do we bring our school community back to them, and what do we look like? I'm gonna skip over a lot of this, which is mostly the federal work around this. I can send this to you if you have more interest, but this is, you know, what are we thinking about? 80% or more, you know, if we can include them, if we get them 80% or more in a mainstream classroom, you can see that they do better. They do better. So how are we doing that? What are our strategies to get there? And this focuses on students receiving special education services or have been identified with a disability, a learning difference, like ADHD or dyslexia, you know, those type of things. What are we doing to create that space where teachers feel prepared to include these children in their classrooms with all children, right? So what are we doing to make sure that we're supporting our teachers? And so this is the SPED component. So FAPE is kind of the free and appropriate public education. It's a cornerstone of IDEA. It's federally mandated that we identify and make sure that we offer each student a free public education, and that is any school, any publicly funded school offers this type of intervention, support, resource. So that's an important thing. There is Child Find, which is another federal program that you may have heard of, that is required that children are all identified, that we have to identify these, that we have to make sure that we're doing that work, and that's critical, because if we don't know which students need these extra supports, then we can't provide it. So I'm going to move forward. I think this is kind of an interesting slide because it talks about high expectations for all of our kids. And you know, how are we doing that and making sure that all students and students with disability, that we're closing those gaps, right? So that goes to that closing the gap. It goes to the A through F rating and our domains. So it's still part of that, kind of critical. High expectations, adequate support is going to equal to success. And this is something that we know that we need, is to make sure that our adults, this is where our adult behaviors absolutely do impact students and student outcomes. So what are our expectations of ourselves and our school districts? So the next kind of student population that we really want to focus in, because it's incredibly critical here in Texas especially, is those emerging bilingual students. And not just about getting them to learn English, but how do we really capitalize on that emerging bilingualism for our students who are English speaking? How do we create true dual language programs? How do we create the kind of programming that lifts our emerging bilingual students up so that they are true bilinguals and creates more bilinguals in a state where, and a nation, quite frankly, that is way behind the world in second languages? We certainly don't want to throw away this advantage or minimize the importance of these students and their culture and how they're bringing that up. So what does that look like? We already talked about the terminology change, which is becoming a federal issue as well, legislative update. So, you know, one of the things that we can talk about is what is that, what are we doing for emerging bilinguals that isn't even, unique while they're sitting in the classroom? Can they have a bilingual dictionary? Do they put them next to another student who shares that language so that they can discuss? Can we use manipulatives? Does everything have to be word-based or language-based? And then, are we making sure that we have good and strong direct English instruction so that we're moving them forward, so that they are not losing one language to gain another, but rather enriching in both languages.
Patricia, I've been out a while. We still give our kids bilingual dictionaries? We still do? Okay. All right. I remember.
That's one thing that we use.
Okay.
Yeah, one tool.
Okay.
So, important. And I think this is a video, so I want you to see this real quick. We're just going to go through this is a lesson, a math lesson, and I want you guys to see what some of this can look like.
Yeah, absolutely.
At Harvard Business School, we have a unique approach to online learning.
Hey guys, we have testing all week this week and next week. The tests are going to be hard, but that's all right because we're going to try really hard. Isn't that right, Cameron? Yes, Ms. Peters. Okay, great. Everyone listen up. So we're going to want to work on we get ours from the answer and the information in the story, okay? We're going to go ahead and test, factual test, and try the actus test. Test your test. Open up. So we're going to page. You go to 3. First on page 3.
¿Qué dijo? ¿A poco va a empezar el examen? No, es una práctica.
We're going to take notes from the story and we're going to turn it into a math problem and we're going to walk through it together, okay? So the boy ran 3 blocks. So everyone write 3 blocks. How long did it take him to run 3 blocks? Michelle? Very good, 6 minutes. All right, so then we're going to take 3 blocks and 6 minutes,
¿Por qué el
right?
niño corre con los bloques? ¿Qué? Sí, ¿por qué el niño corre con los bloques? No,
Okay, so the
corre 3
question I'm going
calles.
to go on to ask us, how long will it take him to run 20 blocks? What do we do? How many minutes is that per block?
8 minutes.
Try and remember to raise your hand if you want to answer, okay? No, it's not 8 minutes. Michelle?
18 minutes?
Nope, not 18 minutes. Yes, Enrique?
40?
40, yeah, very good. How'd you get 40?
I don't know.
You don't know? Well, 40 is the right answer. How did you get it?
I forgot.
You forgot. Okay. Does anyone know how we get 40? Yes, Moises. Yep, that's right. Very good. Great. Can you tell us how you got that?
40?
Yep, very good. But can you explain to the class what you did here, how you got that? Okay, all right, you guys. Joe, do you want to lose your recess?
No.
Okay, then. Thank you, Moises.
Can you help me, please?
Can you take a walk with me?
I couldn't either. What did it say?
Need test in Spanish.
Sí, estoy preocupada sobre el examen. La directora Rosa dijo que todavía tenemos que hacer.
Just try your best, okay? Do you understand? Not importante.
Sí, sí es importante.
You're right, Moises. It is important.
He should have had a different teacher.
Well, teachers, you know, is
Most children walk into Claremont
best, but
Immersion
she's in a
School in
clinic.
Oh, I think it's
Arlington,
still running in the
Virginia,
background.
speaking only their native language. By the end of 5th grade, they walk out bilingual in English and Spanish. But they take a lot of different pathways to that end result. For English language learners, the pathway involves several different supports, depending on what students need. In Amanda Reynolds' 4th grade classroom,
So, when we think
Like
about
those are
that,
the videos for the telepath training.
what were y'all think? What'd you think about that? You were mad at the teacher?
Yes.
Mad, I mean, how, you know, do you think that's a common experience?
Yes.
I like to know. Like they used to take
Oh, wow.
Because my mom had to literally take that dictionary
Yeah.
and translate worksheets
Wow.
from English to Spanish.
Wow.
So literally take
Uh-huh.
4 or 5 hours.
Uh-huh. Wow.
So your experience is this
Spanish
is a
is
trigger.
So I didn't have to do national English until
Mhm.
second, third grade.
Mhm. Mhm.
And there was nothing provided in Spanish school, yeah.
Wow.
We lived in
Yeah.
South Florida, we were out, like, not in early elementary. We moved from rural Alabama, which is predominantly
Mhm.
immigrant,
Mhm. Mhm.
the terrible area,
Mhm.
into the suburbs.
Oh, turn your
Where?
mic on.
Into the suburbs where they didn't have that support.
Mhm.
So,
The one behind you.
There you go.
yeah.
Even not that long ago,
Mhm.
I mean, when I was teaching, I was an ESL teacher in high school, and I remember having to struggle to get my kids things translated.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't either they would say, it's not available, oh, we only got bought it in English, or this program only comes in English. I'm like, well, why did you buy those?
Yeah, right. Because you're not thinking about the kids that, yeah.
It was a struggle to find materials that were comparable in Spanish, though, because I know I had that difficulty in curriculum, looking for an assessment that was comparable to what we were using in English. And finally, the state started providing some things, but you know, intervention programs and things like that, you know, they're
Right.
really hard for our.
And so when we think about this, and I appreciate you sharing your experience.
Yeah, thanks for that.
This is very real board work, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
you do need the resources. We do need to understand that these are children, and how are we, and in Texas,
Yeah.
there are over 1 million of our children that are in our classrooms. So what are we doing? It's 20%. I don't know what it is. But you have it.
And now, you know, it's not just Spanish.
Right.
Right.
You know, a lot of people think that it's only Spanish.
I know.
but there's a lot of
Other languages.
Right, right. So how are we making sure that we are providing the right resources?
2,821.
So 2,800 students, another group, a big group of kiddos
Yeah.
that we can do better, right? That we can do better and make sure we're addressing and not forgetting it. So some of the things that we think about are those program models. So when we talk about, like, in the constraints, when we go and we talk about, like, we want to make sure that parents have choice, right? What are the different models that we can do that are going to be successful, not only for our emerging bilingual, but for our English-speaking children as well? And, you know, so what does that look like? And so that's, I think, where this is looking. And so when we think about, like, these ESL pullouts and transitional early exit, those are the most common used, and they have the lowest impact in Texas. So when we are looking at your, you know, as you're bringing back implementation and innovation back into the boardroom to show progress on goals, then what should a boardroom be looking at? What is going to have the highest impact for our kids? What are the models that have the highest impact? Dual language immersion, one way, has a very high impact. So what does that look like? So, you know, just trying to make sure that we're thinking about that as a board. It's really critical. Any questions about this? I'm sorry, I went past. Did you have questions? And you have these slides, and I'll give you better handouts if you can't see
And I
those.
can turn off half of it if that helps anybody. So I don't know if sometimes it's just my eyes or I can turn off half the lights, but
Probably helpful.
okay.
Yeah.
I was gonna say too, like, I think there are things that teacher could have done better in that
Yes,
classroom, but there were
yes.
definitely things that she had probably done that are like best practice. You know, she probably intentionally sat that
Him
little
next to
boy
that
next to
little
the
girl.
girl who's
Yeah,
Spanish,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
Mhm.
Was good.
No, it's fine.
And it speaks to, like, when we're in a hurry, we often don't give our best self, you know, and she's like stressed and like,
She's trying to maintain a
yeah,
classroom.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
So what does that look like? What other ways do you think you could have provided support to that teacher that would have impacted that child differently?
Definitely the resource, a bilingual teacher.
Right. A bilingual teacher.
Or an aid?
Mhm.
Or
Right.
Yeah, many different things.
Somebody who has
right.
that language that could
Right.
help.
That could have spoken
Fit
to him.
explanation.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Or even just the wherewithal to say, like, oh, can I show the class what you did? Instead of saying, can you tell me,
us?
can you tell me?
Yeah.
Like, no, clearly you can't.
Like, the question that came to mind was, is the classroom, to one of y'all's points, set up like this by design? Like, is there intention behind what's going on? Right, because, I mean, I guess that's how, like with our kids, they're in Spanish immersion. And I never wanted them to choose between their cultural inheritance and the systems of our society, right? English first, right? But like as we think about what does the academic future of our kids look like I think, let me say that. I know we're looking for a school that by design wants to balance those things out. That is intentional about how to set up strategy, and that the educator also obviously is supported behind that intention and is properly resourced. Because you're right, she may have been doing those things, but in my mind, I wonder how much of it is a byproduct of her trying to manage it versus this is the system that we have on this campus. This is the best practice. Right? So I guess that's my reflection.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. And so I wanted to jump ahead, this is the last kind of piece of this, and it goes back to that monitoring, right? And you can read this a little bit, but this is kind of, okay, what are the questions that the board asks when we think about these type of things? When we're thinking about making sure that our children with disabilities are supported, or our emerging bilingual children are supported, or our black students are supported. What are we doing to make, and what kind of questions are we asking? And so during that monitoring process, these are the kind of things that you want to bring into that conversation. And because we'll have the monitoring calendar and the progress reports, you'll be able to think about those questions beforehand. And, what's currently happening? Why is this population doing better than this population? Why are these kids doing better here, but they're not doing as well? The same kids, emerging bilinguals, are doing really well here, but they're not doing as well over here. Why, what are the differences? What are the resources? Those are the questions that make for really robust board conversations, and where you guys really can lean in your role of, transformation for our kids in Judson, and what does that look like? And so that's why I think this presentation overall, while it's a little bit dense, is about, how are we addressing the needs of all of our children, and how are we making sure that progress is measured, and then that we are holding ourselves and our districts and the adults accountable for impacting every single student. And you guys have been building on a framework all year that supports all of this. And so that's what we're really excited. We're going to put in the final pieces tonight, and then you will have the entire framework, and that'll be in place. And then there's just a few little pieces that go with it as you fine tune it. You make sure you stay on path. But so I'm really excited. I think this is a good segue into our next section, but I did want to make sure that I opened it up to see if you had any questions. I kind of went through that last part a little fast. Any questions or any thoughts? And I appreciate the way you guys have leaned into it. It's been really helpful. Any questions? Okay. Well, then I think we hit all of our objectives. And I hope that what you're taking away from this is a way to bring these kind of conversations into your book. Okay. So do we want to take a quick little break before we transition? Okay. How about a few more minutes, 10 minutes, and then we'll move into...
Okay.
Do we need to adjourn this meeting
Yes,
and
we do.
start a new one? Okay.
Okay, what time do I have? The time is 5:54. We have completed our session on student outcomes, evaluating student outcomes and improvements, and we will now adjourn this meeting at 5:41 p.m. Okay.
Ready?